Thank you for joining us for this episode. Today I'm joined by Dr. Chris Putnam, and we're going to be speaking about life in the military on the OI show.
Hey friends, this is Dave Kading. Before we get into the show, I wanted to thank Team for supporting the podcast. If you're not aware, Team is a virtual staffing and agency which helps connect virtual teams to your practice. I don't know about you, but I had a harder and harder time finding people to come in and join me in the in-office staff. And so over the last 2 years, we've found 10 virtual people to become part of our team. They do things like answer the phone, they help with billing insurance, they check for documentation before it comes in, they scribe in the exam room, they can order contact lenses, and the list goes on. We've been able to work with several agencies over the years, but we have found that Team has been the most effective at ensuring that our virtual employees get paid, stay on time, and that we're following up with them and making sure that they're a great agency for these people. If you are ever interested in considering a virtual employee into your office, I'd love to chat with you. But also, I wanted to let you know that Team is offering a $250 discount when you first sign up with them. Check out hireteam.com, hireteem.com for a $250 discount, or see the show notes below for a link that will get you to the website. Thanks to Team for supporting the OI show, and thanks to you for being a listener.
Thank you for joining us. Today I'm joined by a reconnected good friend, Dr. Chris Putnam. Chris, it's awesome to have you, my man. How are you?
Oh, I'm great. Thank you so much for having me. This is quite a reconnection indeed. I know we saw each other a few times in pro school, and then, of course, I met you
Yeah.
as the guy that used to run us off the sidewalks in undergrad on your motorbike. So, yeah, it's been a long time. How have you been?
Yeah, good. So yeah, Chris and I went to undergrad together, and we didn't know each other at all. But he apparently remembers me as being this cursed guy who rode a motorbike all over the campus. And then we reconnected, and we connected in optometry school, and went on an eye care mission trip, and Moldova, right? That was
It was
Moldova.
Moldova, and I think we actually did our Pacific
That's right.
senior thesis together.
That's right. Yeah, on the demographics of refractive error in the nation of Moldova, right?
Yes, I think it was a longitudinal refractive error study. And I think I still have the CD-ROM. It was like, in case Dave kicks the bucket, is written on it in Sharpie. So I have that floating around somewhere. I'm too terrified to throw it away. I don't even know what's on it anymore. I don't have a computer that reads CD-ROMs anymore.
Yeah. And then you and we graduated, and I had no idea you weren't in the military when you were in optometry school. When did you make that decision?
Well, in fact, I did join the reserves in optometry school. So both Air Force, Navy, and Army. So I am currently active duty Air Force. They have what's called a health profession scholarship program. And what that
Mm-hmm.
entails is they will pay for 4, 3, 2, down to 1 year. Essentially, if you will give them at least 3 years of active duty service. So
Okay.
when we were still in school, 9/11 had just occurred. And so I went to the local recruiting station in January of 2002, and I went to seek out an Army scholarship. So this is kind of a unique story. I think I'm the only one in the optometry field that was ever turned down from joining the Army to be an optometrist. So for all of my brethren out there that have ever gone to MEPS, the Military Entrance Processing Station, you go down, you stand in your underwear all day, and you have to go through a complete physical. And I was diagnosed with flat feet. So because I had flat feet, the Army's like, no, thank you, son. Thank you for your interest, but not for us. And as I was leaving the MEP station, my recruiter happened to pass by an Air Force recruiter and overheard us talking. The Air Force recruiter said, hey, you ever thought of the Air Force? I'm like, I haven't until now. So suddenly 2 weeks later, same MEP station, same physical, same docs. Welcome to the Air Force, son. So
Oh
yes,
my goodness. Yeah, I actually tried to get in the military while I was in optometry school, but had asthma,
yep. Yep.
No, sorry, your refractive abilities are no good with us because of your asthma. So
Understood.
no, I also got turned down from every branch of the
Fair.
military, but it didn't even take a MEPS. I didn't even have to stand in my
Yeah.
underwear. They didn't want me in any capacity. So that's really interesting. And so in the choice of going into the military, you joined after your first year then, right? Would that be around
It would have,
middle of
yeah. So
first
I would
year?
have sought it out my first year, and then I essentially was accepted my second year. So that way it paid for my third and fourth year. So
Got it.
for
And
those,
then you had to give them
give
3 years.
them 3 years repayment. So
Okay.
you do your officer training at Maxwell Air Force Base in Montgomery, Alabama in the middle of the summer. So that's a real treat. But it's really not too bad. It's more of a head game. Anyone that's ever been in marching band, played sports, done theater, it's a head game, and you know it's
Uh-huh.
going to stink, but everyone around you also thinks it stinks. So there's solidarity in the group suffering. So
Yeah.
it's not bad. You build some lifetime bonds from that. And then right after that'd have been 2005, right after graduation in May of 2005, you spend 6 weeks in Montgomery, Alabama. And then I went to Lackland Air Force Base here in San Antonio, Texas. And that was where I served my first 3 years. And at the end of 3 years, your commitment is up, and they say, hey, if you'd like to get out, you certainly can, but we've got a deal for you. Would you like to complete a residency in primary care / ocular disease? Weird combo, I know. So I'm like, yeah, I'd love to. So it's accredited through the University of Houston College of Optometry, and you do it at Wilford Hall Ophthalmology Clinic. So essentially, you do your 1 year residency training with the first and second year ophthalmology residents. So
Okay. Okay.
the
So
trick there is
so
you do. Oh, go ahead.
so you got out of school, you had 2 years of optometry school paid for.
Yep.
Like, what kind of salary does somebody get during that time period? Is that somewhat competitive to what you would have got on the open market, or is it like really nothing because they're also paying for your optometry school?
Yeah, it's a little bit tricky. So essentially, so the way I looked at it financially was in school, you're having those 2 years paid for, but it also does give you a stipend for a monthly expenses. And then for 2 weeks each year, you're technically on active duty because you're in reserve status, but in reserve status, you have to serve 2 weeks on an active duty status.
Right.
So you will go to a military installation somewhere near you and
Mm-hmm.
just essentially serve for those 2 weeks. And then at the end of that, when you graduate, you are commissioned as a second lieutenant. And upon graduation day, you find another local recruiting station and a officer to swear you in. And now you're a captain or an O3 in the Air Force. And then at that
Okay.
point, you are paid as an O3 going forward. I will
Got it.
say the other thing that's not necessarily, I think, brought to the table as often is there is a professional pay that is given by the Air Force. So your specialty dictates what your monthly pro pay is. And then
Oh.
board certification. So board certification can be, the American Board of Optometry, can be ACMO. It can even be a fellowship in the American Academy of Ophthalmology. And that's also called your board certification pay. So if you add all of those together, it's on the low end of competitive. I will be honest about that. It's on the low end of competitive.
Uh-huh. And is that so? So you're also getting a stipend for your housing, right? In while you're in the military, and when you say your pay, does that include all those other benefits that go along with it? Are you saying, yeah, it's still pretty low?
It does, and it does increase. So I would say if you're going to break it into segments, so I'm 18 years in right now, your first 5 years, you're going to be slightly underpaid according to like the national median. Your next, say, 5 or 6 to 10 years, you're going to be right approaching about median. But once you reach about 12 years, as long as you promote up the chain. So if you make 04, that brings you more in line with a national median. And if you make 05, that will bring you to just above the national median. And if you can carry that on, I think some of the financial benefits that also are not necessarily discussed as much as a big portion of your pay, about 30% of your pay is tax-free because it's considered basic allowance for sustenance and basic allowance for housing. And so you get a base pay,
Yeah.
and then those two BAH and BAS are not taxable. So if you count the tax savings on that, it does add up. So in Yes,
Yeah.
aggregate, it actually is not so far off. I think what terrifies people is when they go into Google and type in military pay and it brings up this table. That's just base pay. And you look at base pay, you're like, oh my God, I can't pay my student loans on this. Hold on a minute. That's just one portion of it. You're missing BAH, BAS, pro pay, and board certification pay. And then there are retention bonuses that you can receive every 3 to 4 years. So.
Right. So, so from a pay perspective, because there's a lot of other things I want to talk about, but from a pay perspective, you can make 30% lower than other people, but the taxes kind of bring you up into somewhat of an area. You're certainly not grossly underpaid being in the military. And if you get out in a couple of years, you may have just got optometry school paid for, got paid to do some things. And then if you stay in as long as you are, then you're also going to be getting some retirement, right? That's been built in and put into that, right?
Yeah, if you make the 20-year point, that's considered full retirement age. So as long as you hit 20 years of active duty, the reserves and the guard use a point system, and that point system is a little bit more complicated because it's built on drill weekends, deployments, and how long you've actually been on active duty. But from a straight easy math, active duty 20 years, it is a defined benefit pension after that, and that's really for the remainder of your life. So once you cross a certain threshold, it's tough to ignore that, and the closer you get to that magical 20, it's a financial mistake to walk away.
Yeah. Interestingly, side note, my cousin Christopher is also right around 18 years, 19 years, somewhere in there, and the two of you are going to be getting out around the same time. And then you just, this retirement that you get paid on for the rest of your life is just something that can't be ignored when it comes to compensation within the military. And I think we take care of military people well in that area.
Absolutely. And I think the one last thing, and I don't want to dominate with just financial talk, but about 5 years ago, they made a change to the retirement system as well, meaning if you can now elect to do what's called a blended retirement system. So when you enter, you get a matching 401k effectively. So the governmental 401k is called Thrift Savings Plan. And so the TSP is essentially an index. So you can choose, intermediates, small, large caps, government bonds, or you can choose like a life cycle that based on your retirement, but you get a matching 3% up to 3%. So that's for those that, because vast majority of folks that join the military don't spend a full 20 years. They're out at 4 or 6 years, depending on their contract. And this was a way to entice people to join, but not leave them empty-handed and walk away with nothing. So the TSP is actually not bad. You can type that into Google as well. And Thrift Savings Plan, its rate of return is fairly competitive with your Vanguards, T. Rowe's, Fidelities. So.
Yeah, if it's an index fund. So you made this decision when you got in right away. Did you just think you were going to do 3 years, and then was the thought, I'm going to get out after that, and then they lured you back in with this residency, and then what did you have to give them after the residency?
Essentially, it's for every year of commitment you have to give 2. So with a 1-year residency, you give 2 years of commitment. So I did my 3, and then I did my residency, and then there are 2 years of commitment, 5, 6. And at this point, they sent me to Scott Air Force Base in right outside of St. Louis, Missouri. And so I had never really thought about it until I went to Scott Air Force Base. But my consultant called me. I was like, have you ever thought of doing the PhD program? I'm like, I didn't know there was such a thing. They're like, sure, you can do a PhD in vision science. And I think UMSL's right across the river. And I'm like, never thought about it. So I took the GRE and did okay, and qualified to not only get AFIT funding for another degree, but you also then, as a PhD student, it's an accelerated program, but you spend 3 years basically as a civilian student just going to the university. Your job is to go to school. And somewhere along the line, that became like the best time of my life. Like I would do that again over and over. I found more enjoyment and more just professional fulfillment in those 3 years than, and this is no offense to anyone I've ever served with, but those 3 years were the best 3 years of my profession.
So I just have to take a step back here. So you're getting paid as an optometrist in the military to go and do a PhD program where most PhDs are just getting by on little stipends here or there. They're not getting paid an exorbitant amount of money. So from the perspective of, if you had done this as a civilian, financially, at the end of your PhD, you're far further ahead than somebody who had done a residency and done a PhD, and you're getting paid the whole time. Now you still have a commitment to the military.
Sure.
Now, because of that 3 years, you've got to give them 6.
So
Okay.
that one adds up. So now we went up to 6, and then I did 3, so that's 9, and suddenly I owe them 6, and I'm at 15 years before I can walk away without writing Uncle Sam a check. So at 15 years, you're like, well, the brass ring is so close. What else am I doing with my life? And so once you spend enough time in the military, interestingly, for the rank, promotion, and so forth, you stop being a clinician, to be competitive with your peers, to make major, which is 05, and lieutenant colonel, or major is 04, lieutenant colonel is 05. You need to step away from being a clinician, and you spend a little bit more time as flight command or squadron command or a project manager. And it's tough, because if you love being a clinician, you have to make that choice. Do I want to maintain my clinical acumen and be a master clinician, but take the risk that I'm not as competitive in a promotion board? Or you step away a little bit and take on more of a leadership or officership role in the Air Force.
Okay.
And that does become kind of a bifurcation. You have to make that choice.
Yeah. So you went and did your PhD in visual science, and I know this, but tell everybody where you kind of focused in on and really dug into. And was that a choice for you? Could you have become, like, an expert on Demodex or something, right?
Right. Oh, no, that's a great question. So I chose to go to University of Missouri, St. Louis, number one, because it was proximity. But when I got a chance to interview, I'd also interviewed at University of Alabama, Birmingham, also interviewed at OSU, and also at Indiana University. And so UMSL was just a great fit. I worked, my graduate advisor was Dr. Carl Bassi. So if you have any UMSL grads out there, I'm sure they know Dr. Bassi. But during that time, it's an accelerated program, so you take about 1.5 years of didactic courses. So you're doing biostatistics, quant analysis. You take like biologic behavior or biologic basis of behavior with the neuroscience and the industrial organizational psychologist. So you work in the other departments, but during that time, you're also getting input from your career field. So other PhDs that are 42Es, which is what optometrists are in the Air Force. So other OD PhDs in the Air Force are looking to bring you into their lab. And so there's a number of PhDs out there. So one has worked on essentially circadian entrainments and IPRGCs. Another one works with the NCAA Care Consortium for TBI management and rehabilitation and recognition. Another one has done dry eye work in microbead assays. Another one has done really high level vision work with like dicoptic kind of backward masking principles. So you're kind of biopic and not binocular. So it depends on what lab you want to go to. And as an Air Force optometrist, the two that you're likely going to go to is here in San Antonio, which is a bioeffects division, or up in Wright-Patterson, which is a human performance wing. So I opted to lean more towards the bioeffects. And so my dissertation emphasis was on macular pigment and measuring spatial distribution and its correlation and contributions to spatial kind of spatial changes of contrast sensitivity, glare disability, and kind of glare or forward masking or forward scatter masking. So the big challenge is depending on who your graduate advisor is, some of them really believe in the figure it out for yourself. They'll be there, so they'll understand and they'll listen, but at the end of the day, they don't care. It's your problem to solve. So if you don't like being autonomous and you don't like having some late nights and one of those like rage and scream at the sky, like, why did I do this to myself? You got to tread lightly into that as well, because it can be a very cathartic experience to go through that and figure it out on your own. But Dr. Bassi and the UMSL staff was very, very helpful in all of that. And so also doing it at an optometry school where most of the PhDs are offered, you get to work with the students. And I think that's where I really developed a passion working with the first, second, and third year students in their physical and geometric optics labs. So once I finished up the dissertation, brought it back to the bioeffects division where we do a lot of directed energy, like protection, and kind of retinal imaging and biomarker detection in the case of a laser injury. So had a lot of interesting times, got to work with a lot of smart people. I will say it is difficult being the dumbest guy in the room, but I mastered that art after 3 years at the division. So it's great to be around incredibly smart people that are thinking about these things all the time.
Yeah, us two South Dakota boys are pretty good about being the dumbest in the room. I have to say, at least for me, I know that. So, you did all of this, and you think about this from the perspective of, we got to have these really smart PhDs that are doing this intensive research in the military, especially, thinking about Air Force with all of the, protection of the help for these people who are flying $100 million airplanes and, all the support people that are part of that. But you were also sharing with me that your life has not just been in a lab, right? You have had some clinician, some clinical aspects. So tell us about your deployments and how that has worked into this life in the military for you.
Yeah, so that would be also something that I did neglect to bring up. If you like to deploy and see faraway lands that are so very unlike your hometown, the military might be for you. I've had 8 deployments all told. A lot of them have been medical readiness training exercises or humanitarian efforts. So I've had a chance to see 5 continents and 12 countries.
Hold on a sec. So systematically take us through that from a timeline perspective. So graduate, do your residency, your PhD. Like, tell us, like, where along the lines did you go, and when was that?
Absolutely. So showed up at San Antonio at Lackland Air Force Base in 2005. 2006 was my very first humanitarian. We worked with the Department of State, and we were sent to Bogota, Colombia, to provide humanitarian healthcare. And the very unique thing about most of these missions trips is you will go as a multidisciplinary team. So you'll have pediatrics, dental, primary care, and optometry. And a lot of times optometry will also act as like an ADVON or an advanced team for the MOST, which is the mobile ophthalmic surgery team. And that becomes really a big challenge because that so many would benefit from just, I hate to say routine, but a very straightforward, phaco cataract procedure. But you also have to be cognizant of the fact that the very advanced ones have higher complication rates and longer recovery rates, and that most team is not going to be on the ground for more than, say, 14 to 18 days. So you almost have to be judicious in choosing the ones that will benefit, but they're not so greatly advanced that there's a higher risk of poor outcomes. So that was my first foray. That was only a year and a half out of school. And so that became a real challenge to figure out what the surgical preferences were.
Now, is this kind of like going on an eye care mission trip, except you've got tons of resources to you?
You do. Yep. Yeah. So you will go down there, and usually it'll be 1 optometrist and usually 2 technicians. And you will bring a library of glasses. And so the optometry travels heavy. We just do. I mean, there's no easy way to do it. I mean, you could try to bring an edger down there, but now you've got risk of no power. The edger breaks, something goes sideways. Now you got nothing. You got lens blanks, and nobody wants. So we always traveled with a full library, and we would usually work with local universities or local Lions clubs, and they were very, very good. And I mean, BCGs, the birth control glasses that everybody speaks so fondly of, there is no shortage of unwanted military issue glasses in the Air Force. We have thousands of those bad boys every single week. So every missions trip, if you ever go to a country and you see military issue glasses on someone, you know that the Air Force, the Army, or the Navy has been there at some point.
Wow, cool. So that was Bogota. Yep.
That was Bogota. And then 2007 was Arctic Care. And so Arctic Care is not necessarily humanitarian because we are in U.S. territory. So that's called a medical readiness training exercise. So there you fly into Bethel, Alaska, and you work with the local National Guard.
I did my 4th year at Bethel.
Nice. Yeah, and Bethel's not a bad place. The clinic there is actually quite nice. And so if you're one of the unlucky ones, you don't stay in Bethel. You get on an HH-60, which is a Black Hawk helicopter, with a smaller team and all of your gear, and you fly out to a remote village. We flew to Point Hope, which is in the Aleutian Chain. Not a great 2 weeks to spend, because when you get to that location, you get off the helo, they shove all your stuff out there, and they're like, "We'll see you here in 2 weeks," and then they fly away. And as you look around, it's just barren white, and you're like, anybody know where they're going? And so you just wait there until a snow machine rolls up, and they put you on the snow machine and make multiple trips because they only got one or two. So yeah, it's an adventure, but the local populace is something quite remarkable. I mean, very resilient. They love playing basketball, because usually like the epicenter in that environment is the school, which doubles as the library, which doubles
Community
as like
center,
the community rec center. And so we would play basketball until 2 or 3 in the morning, because everybody wanted to play, the Air Force kids. So yeah, we would play lots of ball, and it was a small gym, so it was almost like the 3-point arcs nearly touched. So you were shooting half pointers or half quarters, just because it was the only place you could, and they were quick, so fast. So yeah, it was fun. I digress. Awesome. But yeah, so that was 2006 was Bogota, 2007 was Arctic Care, 2008 was El Salvador. So that was more of a Colombia type mission. That one was different because that was strictly Department of Defense, and Bogota was Department of State. So Department of State, you wear your civilian clothes, you don't identify as military, and you travel as a Department of State, like attaché almost. So this was in military, in El Salvador in the summer, pretty toasty. So that wasn't super, but that's just how it goes. And so that was 7, and then I'll try to quickly go through them. Went to Haiti in 2010 after the earthquake. So that was a really rough one. That's probably one of the worst ones I've been on, because that was devastation. That was flattened. There was nothing. There was no infrastructure, water purification, electrical grids, all gone. So you could work as long as your batteries would hold. So you would bring 6 handles, and that's all you could do, because there's nothing. Your BIO would run out of juice at 1, and there's a line of 400 people out there, but there's not a thing you can do. So
wow.
Yeah. So yeah, and then going forward, just couple overseas. So Australia, LUD, so Doha, Qatar. Let's see, where else we've been. UK, I know that's not really a deployment. It's not a bad place to be. Italy and Turkey, and that's about.
Did you tell me you were in Iraq or Afghanistan as well?
No, that one I did not. So I had orders and prepped, and I was ready to go. And they said, "Thank you for your interest in national defense, but we've already got somebody here," because that's traditionally an army billet, like an army.
Okay.
So they were missing someone. So then they were going to bring an Air Force guy, but they had already filled the spot by the time it was time to go. So
where were you were doing trauma care for people that were, coming off of the battlefield?
Yeah, and so that one would have been 2021. So we were in LUD outside of Doha, Qatar, and that was the HKIA, or the Afghanistan withdrawal. So that was a really interesting one, because as Bagram and as HKIA, that's Hamad Karzai International Airport, essentially just gave way, they were using C-17s to evacuate as many people as possible. And the closest airport or country that would take the Afghan, essentially refugees, was Qatar. So we had 67,000 in Qatar, but they could not leave the airfield because they had no visas to be in Qatar. So they had to stay on the runway. So we had to found some way to house them. And then in August, about 6 weeks after the evacuation started, there was an explosion at HKIA, and all of the U.S. military members were evac'd immediately, but they were brought straight to Launchstool and one of our level 1 trauma centers there. But all of the Afghans did not have that luxury, and they brought them to us. So that became about a 1 week span where I took out more foreign bodies, metallic and masonry based foreign bodies than I've taken out in my entire career in a single week. And so much of it, there were blast injuries and essentially, iris essentially there were avulsions all over the place. There's missing lids. You had almost complete decompensation of some globes. I mean, there was nothing you could do. So we didn't have ophthalmology or surgical on the ground. So we had to do our best to try to evac them out and get them where you could. So
good thing you did that residency, man.
Yeah, it was good. I learned how to put on a Fox shield. It was fantastic. It worked out really good.
Wow, buddy, what a career, what an adventure, right? Who would think that this is the career, right? That somebody from South Dakota State University going into optometry, and man, what an incredible adventure you've had in the military. From my perspective, there's goods and there's bads about everything that's out there, but it's been an adventure, right? Struggle on the family side. I know you have family and you had to be away from them and so forth, but wow, thank you for your service. And certainly you've given for our country, and you've done a lot in that arena. And what a cool thing. What would you say, to somebody who's in optometry school right now, thinking about the military? What questions should they be asking themselves?
The first question they should ask is, what are the directions to the nearest Air Force medical recruiter? So go Air Force. The other service is not worth your time. So absolutely, just kidding. But Air Force, I would say if you are in optometry school and you are still uncertain about what you'd like to do, or if you're still somewhat undecided whether you want to go private practice, go corporate, you're still not quite sure, take a very close look at the United States Air Force, because I will say one of the other roles I've been able to take on is I'm the point of contact for our residency, which is a VA-based residency in neuro-optometric and neuro rehab. So we have one residency slot available every single year, and that does have the 2-year payback, but it allows you to earn a residency certificate from an accredited program, and it will give you experience that you will probably see nowhere else. And as you mentioned during my PhD time, you'll be the highest paid resident in the nation because you are on active duty service during that time. So your pay does not change. You are the highest paid resident in all of the nation. So something to think about. And awesome. We also do the PhD. So the PhD, you can choose the university you want to work with. And we've recently stood up a sports vision fellowship. So more of a human performance fellowship that we're morphing into a 2-year Master's of Science degree at University Incarnate Word, Rosenberg School of Optometry.
Yeah.
We've now had 3 graduates, and that's been a real big thing from the standpoint that I think we lacked a lot of standardization in the kind of sports vision performance realm. And so we've been able to work with Special Warfare in town and Synaptic and some of the other device manufacturers. And I think there's been a lot of goodness because the military is a repository for data. I mean, we can trade and take so much data off of such large sample sizes that it's almost unprecedented. So bottom line, if you are interested in the United States Air Force or any branch of service and you're not quite sure what your next choices are, talk to a recruiter. You owe them nothing unless you take money. So if you want to explore options, if you want to look at different avenues, there's also what's called direct accession. So you don't have to take the scholarship. You can wait until graduation and then do a direct accession, at which point you are eligible for a loan repayment program. That's not a guarantee, but most years it is available, and it's up to $40,000 paid to you for additional 2 years of service. And so that's not a bad deal to kind of trim off a little fat from your student loans.
Yeah. Well, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, hey, thank you for sharing about your career. Very fascinating, and it's spectacular. And thank you for your service.
Yes, thank you so much. If there's ever a chance to meet up again, I hope we run into each other at a future conference. I always love hanging out with Dave Kading.
So. Yeah. Thanks, buddy. And thank you for joining us for this episode. Make sure to like and subscribe. Stay tuned for future episodes of the OI Show.
Thanks again, friends, for joining us for this episode. Again, thanks to Team for their support of this episode. If you're considering or have ever considered getting a virtual team member for your practice, check out hireteam.com. That's HIRETEEM.com. Mention the OI Show when signing up, or hit the link below for a $250 discount off of your first month's team member.